The sky over Port Plédran droops like a wrung-out rag, a moody mixture of pewter and stale brews as you crouch behind the barnacled barrels by the edge of the wharf. You've spent all morning pretending not to exist. That's harder than most would think. A twitch of the hand, a cough, the glint of a boot buckle in the wrong light, all betrayals. The constables are not brilliant men, but they know the smell of sweat and fear. You are not a boy. You are not mute. You are not supposed to be here. But none of that matters, not if you time your next move exactly right. Because in the water below, listing against the rotting piles of the dock, is the last ship in port likely to take on a new hand. And she's not just any ship. She is the Midnight Gale. Her hull is darker than pitch, but sun-faded flags whip lazily at her topmast. Not a Navy SEAL, not a merchant's crest, only a red ribbon tangled in a bone. Everyone knows she takes no allegiance, and that those who board her tend not to return in a condition worth describing. Her name is muttered among thieves and fishwives alike, usually accompanied by a glance over the shoulder. But to you today, she is more than myth. She is escape. The disguise was your idea. An old linen shirt too big hangs off your shoulder, cinched with a borrowed rope belt. Your hair hacked shorter than you'd like itches beneath the woolen cap. You haven't spoken since the constables started asking questions about the broken window and the poisoned magistrate's stew. Someone else had been in the pantry first, but you were the one caught with the silver spoon still warm in your hand. They'll hang you by sunrise unless the tide carries you away first. The crew is loading crates, gunpowder, dried limes, bundles of salted cod, barefoot and fast. You time your sprint keeping low and slip between two tattooed men who barely glance at you. One grunts something about fetching the mop boy, and that's your in. You duck under a swinging net of dried oranges and disappear into the shadowed belly of the ship. You smell it before you see its stale wood, soaked with sweat and seaweed, and the iron tang of blood that's long dried into the boards. Below deck, a hammock creaks. Someone snores. You creep past a row of crates, stamped with a serpent, curled around an anchor, and settle behind a pile of damp rags that might once have been a sailor's coat. You count your breaths and wait. Minutes pass, then hours, and no one notices. Or more precisely, they do, but they let you believe they don't. By nightfall, the ship lurches. She's leaving. The ropes are cast off. No horns, no fanfare, just the splash of oars and the whisper of wind through the rigging. You peek out and see the last lanterns of Plédran fade behind you, swallowed by the fog like embers drowned in ink. You are aboard the Midnight Gale, and you are alive. For now, they call you Rat. It isn't affectionate, but it is efficient. You scrub, you mop, you carry buckets of slop to the rear of the ship and dump them overboard, watching fish scatter like frightened coins. You nod when spoken to, shrug when questioned. The act is simple. Stay quiet. Pretend to be a mute boy. Keep your eyes low and your ears sharper than any blade on board. The crew is a mix of nationalities, skin tones, and tempers. French swearing curls around Dutch orders which crash into Caribbean chants and Gaelic curses. No one here expects names to be true. One-eyed bastards call each other things like Gutstring, Snagglettoe, and Captain Shivers. But Captain Shivers, as it turns out, is not the captain. The real captain is a woman named Lys Thévenet. Not that anyone dares say her name on deck. They just call her she, the way sailors refer to storms or death. You glimpse her only once in those early days, standing on the quarterdeck at dawn, her hair braided with silver thread boots soaked with salt. Her coat is plum velvet, and she wears it like armor. She watches the horizon the way a starving dog watches a butcher's door, and for a moment, you forget to breathe. There's something feral about her, something that doesn't quite fit the human frame. She moves like she knows the sea is afraid of her. She must be the kind of person they tell legends about in the alleyways of Nantes or the gutters of Tortuga. You remember stories from your grandmother of women who swallowed the ocean and birthed storms, of girls who sang ships into whirlpools and danced on the bones of drowned men. But those are just tales, aren't they? One morning, you're swabbing the main deck elbow deep in salt water and vinegar when a man named Tombeau leans close and mutters in your ear, "You smell like Paris." You don't look up. You don't move. He chuckles, half toothless and sour. Too clean. Too something. But that's fine. Ship needs ghosts as much as men. That's the first time you realize someone sees through you. Or maybe they've always seen and just don't care. After all, if you scrub the deck and don't scream when the rats bite your ankles, what harm could you be? Then again, superstition runs thicker than blood on a pirate ship. One man staring turns to two. A whisper follows you from mast to galley. At dinner, no one sits near you, but no one throws you overboard either. The Midnight Gale sails westward toward no map you've ever known. The stars above seem rearranged. One night you overhear two sailors arguing over constellations. "That ain't the Boer," one says. "Too many legs." And it moves, the other hisses. "Stars don't move like that." You pretend not to listen, but you glance upward that night and see it too. A cluster of blinking white fire-shaped wrong pulsing like breath. The sea beneath you is too calm. Then the dream starts. You dream of ropes tied in strange knots, knots you didn't tie. Of a mirror in the captain's cabin covered in brine and shadow, where your reflection moves a heartbeat too slow. Of a voice calling your real name, not the false one you gave up 2 ports ago, but the one no one should know. Worse still, you wake one night to find the ship is still. Dead still. Not a creak, not a sway. Even the waves have stopped. You climb quietly to the deck barefoot, careful not to wake the others. The moon is high and fat and too yellow, like butter left too long in the sun. The sails hang limp, and at the helm unmoving is the compass, spinning, not clockwise, not counterclockwise, just spinning, like it wants to tear itself free from the housing. You inch closer. No one else is awake, or if they are, they've chosen to stay below. You stare at the compass, and for a moment your reflection on the glass doesn't match your face. Then a voice, sharp, dry female, cuts the night. "Tell me, boy, how long have you been a girl?" You spin, heart slamming like cannon fire, but the deck is empty. No one stands at the helm, no one behind you, only the compass still spinning. You do not sleep after that. Instead, you pretend harder. You mop more. You speak even less. But you feel it tightening the air around you, the mood of the ship, the whispers that gather like birds before a storm. The captain stops coming to the deck. Tombeau won't look you in the eye anymore. Even the rats seem to scurry away from you. It's only been 2 weeks, and the Midnight Gale is already beginning to know what you are, or worse, what you're not. By the 3rd week aboard the Midnight Gale, the ship begins to breathe with you, or perhaps it's the other way around. You rise when it rises, sway when it sways, sleep only when exhaustion wrestles you unconscious, and eat what's handed to you, without asking what it once was. Life on a pirate vessel is less like living and more like slowly becoming part of a machine made of rotted wood, rusted tools, and badly kept secrets. You no longer look for safe harbor. You only look for silence. But that silence, your own, has begun to draw noise. You once believed not speaking would protect you. That if your voice remained sealed behind your teeth, your lie would remain sealed too. Yet there's something about quiet that unnerves pirates. Perhaps it reminds them of things better left forgotten, or perhaps it forces them to hear the sea more clearly than they'd like. Either way, your act is no longer enough. No one says it outright, but their glances linger too long. They speak around you, not to you. They let things fall near your feet just to watch how you pick them up. You are no longer invisible. You are a curiosity, and that is a far more dangerous thing. Take Fletch, for example. A scrawny Englishman with a mouthful of gold teeth and a tattoo of a cracked bell ringing across his neck. He begins to follow you. Not closely, not obviously, but every time you turn a corner near the galley, he's already leaning there. When you're swabbing the starboard deck, he appears with a tin cup and watches. Once he drops a rag in front of you and waits, eyes gleaming, to see whether you'll hand it back with your left hand or right. You use your foot to kick it toward him. He laughs. Mutes still got preferences, eh? You don't respond. Later you overhear him whispering to another sailor in the shadows near the water barrels. Swears it flinched at the smell of tobacco. Not normal. I seen mute boys, this one don't blink right. You crouch nearby, pretending to scrape mildew from the barrels. Your ears sharpen your breath shallow. You've become something hunted, not openly, not yet, but stalked. In the way men stalk riddles they're not smart enough to solve, but too superstitious to ignore. Then comes the incident with the boots. You'd found them beneath an empty hammock, leather supple, clearly well cared for, and far too large for you. But they were dry, unlike your own. And on the Midnight Gale, dry boots were a prize above rum or rest. So you'd slipped them on and walked the deck twice before gut-string stopped you cold. Whose boots? You shrugged. Don't give me that gull-eyed stare. You didn't drag those off a shark. Again you shrug. He steps close. You can smell the salted cod stuck in his beard and the mildew in the stitching of his shirt. Them boots belonged to the last boy who swore he was mute. A beat passes. You think perhaps he'll laugh. He doesn't. He spoke loud enough when we found the pins in his satchel. He taps the side of your temple with a finger that ends in a jagged nail. Wigs come with pins, you know. Pins come with hair, and boys don't come with those. You return the boots in silence. You go barefoot for the rest of the week. Your hands begin to blister in strange ways, raw patches in the soft parts of your palms that no one else seems to suffer. You don't complain. You dare not. But you wonder whether the ship is punishing you, or perhaps reshaping you. You catch glimpses of your reflection in puddles between planks, and sometimes the face you see seems fuzzier, less anchored, more borrowed. Then the trial begins. You do not recognize it as a test at first. You only notice that the tasks you're given start to shift subtly. Instead of being told to clean the galley floor, you're told to reach behind the spice rack to retrieve something caught in the seam. Instead of scrubbing the masts, you're asked to climb halfway up and retie a sail that isn't loose. When you oblige, the rigging creaks unnaturally beneath you, almost as if someone has already greased the rope or sabotaged the knots. At dinner, you're handed a ladle with a sharp crack in the handle, one that bites into your palm when you stir. A test to see if you'll cry out. You don't. But your breath hitches and someone notices. You see them noticing. At night, the hammock beside yours is cut. The man who usually sleeps in it, old Jacob, who smells of seawater and dreams of goats, was moved topside for watch. So, when the hammock rips and drops like a trapdoor, no one falls. But everyone hears it, and everyone watches you the next morning to see if you'll flinch when the replacement is hung. You don't, but something else does. There's a shadow that no longer lines up with your body during sunset. You notice it once while coiling rope. The sun hits your shoulders, casts your figure against the barrels, and your silhouette lingers just a second too long after you move. Then one night Captain Lice speaks, not to the crew, to you. You are cleaning the lantern glass near her quarters, carefully not looking into the mirror mounted outside her cabin door. That mirror always feels wrong, too still, as if it captures more than just reflections. Her voice slinks out from the shadowed doorframe like a snake wrapped in silk. If I asked you your name, she says, would you write it down? You pause, then return to wiping. If I asked your real name, she adds, would your hand even know the letters anymore? The words scratch across your back like a dry wind. You don't look up. You finish your task, bow slightly, and retreat. She does not stop you. But as you turn away, she calls one final question into the hall behind you. Do you dream of drowning? You do. It becomes clear that your silence has done what your words never could. It has made you the axis of something larger. You are now the quiet center of a spiral that is widening with each passing tide. There are rituals being observed aboard the Midnight Gale, and you are either the intended sacrifice or the accidental witness. Either way, you are marked. One morning, a chunk of bread is handed to you with a strand of black hair embedded in it. Long, curled, wet. It is not yours. You look up, but the cook has already turned away. That night, the waves change their song. You've heard them slap and lurch and whisper, but now they begin to pulse, as though mimicking a heartbeat. Not yours. Below deck, you feel it in the wood, a low, steady thrum. On the third night of that rhythm, Tombo comes to you. He says nothing. He merely sets down a bowl of soup, kneels beside you, and places a candle between you both. Then he speaks a single word. Why? He doesn't specify what he's asking. He doesn't need to. You do not answer. He reaches into his coat and pulls out a ring. A plain golden band with 2 grooves etched like ropes wrapping it. He places it in your palm and closes your fingers around it. She drowned wearing this, he says. Now the sea wants someone else to wear it. He stands and walks away, never looking back. You do not keep the ring. You return it to the sea the next night. Not over the rail, no. You climb into the narrow space between water casks and kneel before the small wooden hatch in the floor. It's an old access port, forgotten, maybe forbidden. You open it. Below a pool of saltwater laps at the ship's inner belly. The sea has always had eyes there. You drop the ring. It does not sink. It floats, for a moment too long. Then slowly, it begins to spin. Like the compass, you close the hatch. By the 4th week, the crew stops testing you. Not because they trust you, but because they no longer want to know. You have become a talisman, a warning. A question no one dares finish asking. Men speak to you as though delivering prayers. Short, sharp words. Here, take, go. No eye contact, no thanks. You are fed first and last, as if to cover both bases, either to nourish a curse or starve a ghost. Even Fletch keeps his distance now, but the sea grows louder. The sails flap without wind. The rats stop skittering. One night, the crow's nest bell rings 3 times, and no one is up there. A fog rolls in thick as fleece and doesn't roll out for 2 days. And when it clears, the horizon is empty. No land, no ships, not even gulls. Just ocean as flat as oil, and the sky above absent of stars. On the 6th night of starless sky, the captain holds council. Not formally, not publicly, but you see them, her gut-string Tombo, the cook, and the woman with the braided beard they call the bone singer, standing around a barrel by lantern light. You can't hear the words, but you can feel them. The way you feel thunder before it strikes. Their faces are drawn tense. One of them points at you. The lantern flickers out. When it returns, the circle has broken. Only the bone singer remains humming a tune that sounds like weeping in reverse. She sees you watching. She nods. You have kept your lie too well. Now they believe you are exactly what you've claimed to be. A mute boy who should not be alive. A silent shape who should not cast shadows. A soul who did not board the Midnight Gale, but arrived nonetheless. The wind has grown hesitant. It stutters across the sails like a candle flame trying to stay alight in a damp cathedral. The ropes sway without rhythm, and even the seabirds, those ragged-winged freeloaders who always followed in lazy arcs, have vanished from the sky, as if the very concept of land has faded from their minds. It's as though the Midnight Gale has passed not only beyond charts, but beyond memory itself. It's within this stillness that the sea begins to speak, not in voices, not in words, but in a kind of rhythmic insistence, a pattern too complex to be wind, too regular to be coincidence. The waves knock against the hull in triplets, thumb, thumb, pause, thumb, always the same. You catch yourself tapping the rhythm into your leg, your palm, the galley wall, and then you realize it's not you doing it. It's your hand moving before you think. The ocean is playing you like an instrument. You try to drown it out with taskwork. You offer yourself to every chore, coiling ropes, scraping barnacles, repairing nets, even hauling slop from the kitchen. But the rhythm follows, in the slap of a mop on wood, in the swing of a bucket, even in the thrum of your own heartbeat, which begins to mirror the sound. You begin to wonder, has the sea always spoken like this, and you're only now listening? Or has it chosen you specifically to hear? That night, when you finally collapse into your hammock, the whispers come. They are not like dreams. Dreams flutter, these dig. They come in pulses, each one rooted in the center of your chest, vibrating outward into your limbs. They don't speak in language, but in suggestion, in idea, in meaning you understand without translation. And yet beneath it all, there is a sound. Faint, constant. It is not thunder. It is not whale song. It is breath. The ocean is breathing, and it is exhaling secrets into your bones. In your waking hours, you begin to recall things you never lived. Faces too old to be your memories. Hands that stitched sails in foreign ports with fingers, not your own spices you've never tasted, whose scents now waft past your nose in the dead of night. You catch yourself saying names under your breath, names of islands that don't appear on any chart of ships that never returned. You write them on scraps of sailcloth, Antur, Saradine, Muruth, Isla del Cuervo. Tombo finds one such scrap. He doesn't ask where it came from. He simply stares at the name Saradine and mutters, "That island was cursed off the maps 3 lifetimes ago." You try to take the scrap from him, but he backs away, his eyes glassy. No one speaks that name. That's the island with the red sands, where teeth grow in trees. You want to laugh, but you can't, because you remember those trees too. You remember the way the teeth clicked in the breeze. The crew begins to murmur of the change. They do not say it outright, but you hear it in the way they count the days without wind, the way they trace the lines of their palms at night, as if trying to find new meanings in their old scars. The bone singer in particular grows restless. She sharpens bones against the mast without using a whetstone. They screech as they carve. She hums backwards lullabies to no one, and she paints symbols on the hull using a paste made of fish blood and powdered coral. When asked, she mutters only one word, listening. You suspect she hears it too, whatever it is. Then comes the fish, or more accurately, the absence of them. No catch for 7 days, not a single scale in the nets. No schools beneath the glassy black surface. Even the bait rots faster than it should, as if touched by something repelled by life. The cook begins to ration. Fights break out over moldy biscuits. Someone accuses someone else of hoarding. There is shouting, but it dies quickly. No one wants to raise their voice. It might echo. It might be heard. You do not fight. You do not eat much. You do not sleep long. You just listen, and the sea whispers louder. It tells you stories now, not with words, but with dreams that bleed into your waking mind. You see a ship split down the middle, not by storm or cannon, but by song. A single note high and keening, cleaving wood like an axe. You see women with coral crowns rising from beneath, holding mirrors that show not reflections, but futures. And then you see yourself, or something like you. A girl, hair matted with salt mouth sewn shut by a sailor's thread, standing at the helm of a ghost ship made entirely of bones and sails woven from bridal veils. She stares at you through time and tide, and then she points at the Midnight Gale. You wake with sand in your mouth, not grit, not salt, sand, fine and red. You spit it out, heart pounding. You check your hammock. Nothing. No dunes, no island, only ship and shadow. But the taste lingers. And when you wipe your lip, there's blood. Not yours. The captain orders a halt. No explanation. No anchor dropped. Just a standstill. She commands the sails be tied, the rigging locked. No one questions her not anymore. Her hair has begun to streak white in places. Her hands tremble when not clutched behind her back. She walks less and stares more. At the sea, at the horizon, at you, especially you. She corners you near the gunpowder crates one dusk. The lanterns haven't been lit yet. The shadows pool like oil. You're listening, she says. You stay silent. That's how it starts. She continues. It sings to you. Drips in slowly. You think you're remembering your own thoughts, but they're not yours, are they? You look down. You think you can run from what you are. But the sea remembers everything. She takes a step closer. You can smell salt and sweat and lilac oil on her collar. It remembers her too. You risk a glance at her face, and there's something in her eyes that shouldn't exist on a living woman. Not pain, not fear. Something older. Something shipwrecked. You have her eyes, she whispers. Then she walks away. You begin hearing voices behind doors, not people. Voices. One morning, the quartermaster opens a hatch in the floor and swears he heard a girl humming. But no one's there. Another time, Fletch tosses a barrel overboard after claiming it spoke in his sleep. The bones inside it clattered like teeth. The crew starts to avoid you openly now. You eat alone. You work alone. You sleep with one eye open and one hand tucked under your blanket, clutching the dagger you stole from a sleeping sailor on your second night aboard. You haven't used it, but its weight reminds you that some part of this body still belongs to you. Yet even that grows doubtful. One evening you glance into a bucket of rainwater and do not see your reflection. You see a woman, lips parted, eyes wild, hair floating as though underwater. She blinks, and your heart stops. You fall backwards, spilling the bucket. When you return to look, it's only water. Only you. But the part of you that wants to scream, truly scream, knows the truth. You didn't imagine it. The sea didn't lie. It never lies. It only remembers, and the others begin to forget. The men forget verses to songs they've sung for years. They forget which knot goes to which rope. They forget where they buried things. One sailor forgets his name. He weeps and scratches at his skin as though his identity were tattooed somewhere he cannot reach. Another wakes screaming that he is not on a ship at all, but in the belly of a beast with sails for teeth. They bind him, but he doesn't stop screaming. He screams the rhythm. Thumb, thumb, pause, thumb. Like the waves. Like your heart. Like a drum beating underwater. When he finally stops, he does not sleep. He just floats, eyes open, mind elsewhere, as if listening to the tide. That night, the bone singer leaves something at your door. It is a bundle wrapped in kelp. You open it slowly. Inside, a piece of mirror, broken sharp, half clouded with age. Carved into the back in rusted lines is a message in a tongue you don't recognize but understand. The sea hears secrets, but it does not forgive them. You begin writing again. Not out of choice, but compulsion. Your hands move at night. You wake to see symbols drawn in the condensation of the hull. Spirals, eye shapes, long vertical lines like ropes with teeth. You find words in your own handwriting that you don't remember penning. She walks with salt in her lungs. She dreams in circles. Her tongue was taken, but the sea gave her a new one. And most haunting of all, you are her echo. You burn the pages. You burn the cloth. You toss the scraps into the sea, but the next morning they returned, folded on your pillow, dry, and still you say nothing. Because what would you say that you feel yourself disappearing, that your heartbeat no longer belongs to you, that you can hear secrets that were never whispered to your ears? They wouldn't believe you, or worse, they would. You begin to notice them around the 5th week, not that they weren't there before. You'd seen them, the quiet ones who hauled ropes without speaking, who slept upright against barrels instead of in hammocks, who moved from task to task, as though following instructions whispered in a different time. But something shifts. Where before they had been part of the scenery, they now seem to orbit you. 3 in particular. You don't know their names. No one says them. You try asking Tombeau once, gesturing toward one of the men with the dark eyes and the slashed coat. He doesn't even glance that way. They're not part of crew, he mutters. They're part of ship. You want to believe it's a metaphor, something poetic. A superstition old sailors tell to comfort themselves when logic wears thin. But it isn't. The first time you truly see one is during night watch. You've been assigned to the upper deck to polish the lantern cages, an odd task, given that the night is moonless, the wind indifferent, and the ship moving slower than a ghost dragging chains. Still, you obey. You've learned that disobedience is rarely punished aboard the Midnight Gale. Obedience, however, is often met with scrutiny. It's the ones who try to blend in too well who vanish. You're kneeling, rag in hand, the tarnish on the brass cage clinging stubbornly to the cloth. And then, he's there, not approaching, not climbing the steps, just there, standing across from you, arms folded, the lantern glow catching the edge of his cheekbone. He's not large, not imposing, just wrong. He doesn't blink, not once, and his gaze doesn't move the way a gaze should. It doesn't drift, it pins, like a harpoon through fog. You freeze, the rag drops. He speaks eventually. Do you know how long this ship has sailed? His voice is dry, not gravelly, but hollow, like a flute whose note has never been tuned. You don't answer. Neither do I, he says, as if that explains everything. Then he turns, walks, no glides down the steps, and vanishes before his boots make a sound. You stand there until the lantern burns out, not because you've forgotten to relight it, but because your hands won't stop shaking. You try to ask again the next day. You ask the cook who once saw a whale give birth and hasn't stopped grinning since. You point toward the silent man, this time seated alone, winding rope with hands too clean for the work he does. The cook merely shakes his head. Don't ask the tide why it rises, he says. Just float. They begin appearing in your periphery, always close, never speaking. One sharpens a blade that never dulls. Another polishes an old spyglass, though no one's seen him use it. The third just sits, watching. You pass him every morning. He never eats, never works. His shirt is always pressed. One night as you pass below deck, you see all 3 of them gathered around a barrel, not speaking, not moving, just staring down into it. You lean closer. They speak in a language that is neither voice nor sound. You don't hear it so much as feel it scraping across your ribs, tapping behind your teeth. You stagger backward and they all turn, in perfect unison. You run. You begin to mark the changes in others too. It starts with the pupils. The crew's eyes adjust more slowly to the lantern light now. Some squint in daylight, others don't blink at all. One morning, the helmsman steers for 3 hours without twitching once. You observe from the rigging pretending to re-knot a line. He hums to himself, not a song, but a tone. One long, low note. The kind you hear in caves when water drips into a deep hollow, and the echo rolls for minutes. You try to mimic it once, just to see if your throat can. It can, too easily. You stop at once. The bones begin to appear again, small ones at first, in strange places. A finger bone in the powder room, a jaw fragment in your bucket. No blood, no decay. Just clean, smooth, yellow-white bones that seem to have risen from the wood itself. Someone leaves a rib beneath your hammock. It's not a message. It's an invitation. One fog-thick morning, Captain Leiss orders the crew to assemble topside. This alone is odd. She rarely speaks to everyone at once. You gather barefoot and wary, sensing the tension like a tightened sail before a storm. She stands barefoot as well. This is new. Her boots are gone. Her coat, too. She wears only a threadbare linen shirt and trousers. No ornament, no weapons, only silence. I need 2 volunteers, she says. Her voice cracks, not from weakness, but from wear. No one moves. The fog thickens. She doesn't repeat herself. Eventually, 2 sailors step forward. Gutstring, always proud, always eager, and Fletch, who doesn't look at anyone. They walk to her heads high, as if showing off bravery for a crowd that does not exist. She doesn't thank them. She only nods. Then she says, "You'll be diving." A murmur stirs. "Why now?" someone mutters. She ignores it. Below the keel, she says. The barnacles are speaking. Laughter erupts. Not the kind that relieves tension, but the kind that borders hysteria. Someone claps. Another spits. "Barnacles, you've lost your head, woman." But Fletch just nods. So does Gutstring. They dive. You wait on the rail, pretending to check the rope knots as the divers disappear beneath the dark water. 1 minute. 2. 3. You do not breathe. 4 minutes. A ripple. 5. A figure surfaces. It is not Gutstring. It is not Fletch. It is not breathing. The body is bloated eyes, rolled mouth full of seaweed and salt. But it wears Fletch's gold-toothed grin. The bone singer reaches down, pulls something from the corpse's clenched hand. A braid, hair long red, unmistakably feminine. She doesn't show it to the crew, only to the captain. The atmosphere after the dive changes. It isn't panic. It isn't mourning. It's something stranger. Resignation. The crew becomes quieter. They stop singing altogether. Games of dice cease. Arguments are whispered, if at all. And the ship, despite no wind, continues to move forward. You stop asking questions, not because you fear answers, but because you fear understanding. Each truth you've uncovered has tied you tighter to the ship. Every secret you hold has made you more like it. The more you know, the more it knows you. You speak to no one, but they still test you. One of the 3 silent men appears in your hammock. You return after galley duty to find him lying there, hands crossed, eyes closed, asleep, dead. You don't dare touch him. You back away. Wait. The moment your foot creaks on the floorboard, his eyes open, still unblinking. Still wrong. He doesn't rise. He just speaks. She's not gone. She's underneath. You say nothing. She can't breathe salt. But she remembers how. You take another step back. She wears your skin, then he blinks, for the first time. And it feels like thunder. That night your voice returns, not in speech, in scream. You wake shrieking, thrashing against the hammock's netting like a fish in a trap. The scream is raw, primal, not even human in pitch. It startles the rats. It shakes lanterns from hooks, but no one comes to check. No one mentions it in the morning. The crew merely looks at you differently, as if waiting. And still the men who don't blink linger. They never eat, never clean, never bleed. They follow you, not like predators, like witnesses, as if waiting for something to finish, waiting for you to finish, to change. One day one of them offers you a blade. You don't ask why. You take it. It is cold and etched with a spiral that hums when near water. You don't tell anyone you've begun to hear the humming, even when the blade isn't near. You polish the lantern cages again that night, the same one from before, and again he's there. Not the same man, but the same type. Silent, still, watching. This time he speaks again. She drowned once. You say nothing. She drowned twice. He steps closer. But third time, he touches your shoulder. She breathed, then vanishes. By now, you have stopped expecting logic. You no longer try to untangle the sequence of events, nor do you attempt to convince yourself that any of this can be explained by natural law. The Midnight Gale is not sailing on water anymore, not in any sense that matters. She is drifting through something older than oceans, deeper than currents. She is no longer a ship, but a story you cannot climb out of, and each breath you take is another line inked into the margins of that tale. The morning it happens, the sun rises pale and wide, but without warmth. The clouds hang like gauze, and the air smells faintly of metal and ash, as if a forge had been left open in the sky, smoldering just out of reach. You wake with a sour taste in your mouth and a strange pressure in your ears, like the air itself is holding its breath. The deck beneath your feet creaks more than usual, groaning with every step, as though each plank resents your weight. The gulls are gone, and even the wind seems unwilling to touch the sails, but it's the silence that truly unnerves you, not the silence of men unwilling to speak, a deeper one, the kind of silence you find in sealed crypts or inside caves long forgotten by maps. A silence that does not wait for sound, it punishes it. And in the center of this silence, the compass begins to spin. It starts subtly. You pass the helm in the early light and notice the needle twitching, not in the normal, fidgety way of a well-worn instrument responding to minor shifts in magnetic pull, but in a stutter, as if trying to make a decision it can't settle on. You pause, glance at it once, then glance away. You tell yourself it's nothing. A momentary shiver, a false movement from an overused tool, but when you pass again a few minutes later, the twitch has grown into a dance. The needle whirls in perfect circles, fast, smooth, relentless. Not north to east to west to south, but a blur, as if chasing something it cannot locate. Something that shifts as quickly as it seeks. You stand motionless beside it. The spinning does not slow. If anything, your presence seems to feed it. A gustless gust rushes past your ear, and for a moment, just a moment, you hear laughter in it. Faint, feminine, familiar. Your spine tightens. You do not speak. You do not run. You simply back away one step at a time until the compass is behind you again, and the sound of its spinning fades beneath your heartbeat. Captain Lice is the first to make it official. She stands by the helm by midday, one hand on the wheel, one hand on her dagger's hilt, and announces to no one in particular, there is a curse aboard. She says it calmly, flatly, as though stating a tide schedule. No one laughs. No one challenges her, because by now they have all seen it too. The birds won't land, the fish won't feed, the compass won't stop, and the crew has begun to dream with their eyes open. The whisper spreads quickly, faster than rot in a barrel of lemons. A woman's curse, a curse from the sea. Some claim she came aboard disguised. Others say she was always here, stowed in the wood grain or chained in the hull's belly. Some say she is the ship. Others insist she is you. No one says this to your face, of course. They are too afraid of what your face might become. That night, 3 men begin to chant in their sleep. 3 different hammocks, 3 different languages, but the melody is identical. It hums in the wood, reverberates in the beams. The bone singer clutches her bone chimes and shakes them until they splinter. The cook mutters a prayer to the Virgin, then to Yamoja, then to something he names only as La Profonde. His voice cracks. You press your hands to your ears. The chant seeps through your fingers anyway. It is not words. It is longing. It is remembering. The captain orders the compass removed. Not turned, not covered. Removed. She demands it be pried from the helm and thrown overboard. But when the carpenter, a thick-armed man named Pell, tries to chisel it out, the wood shrieks. Not splinters, not cracks. It screams. A high, brittle wail that sends everyone on deck staggering. Blood leaks from Pell's nose. The chisel rusts in his hand. He drops it and vomits. The captain orders everyone below. You remain behind pretending to mop. But you watch the compass. It has stopped spinning for a moment. Then it begins to turn again, slower, now more deliberate. Not in panic, not in confusion, in invitation, as if aware that it has become the heartbeat of something that can no longer be contained. Later that night, you wake to find someone in your hammock. You do not scream. You simply sit upright and look. It is a girl, your age, your shape, your eyes, but her lips are sewn, her throat slit, and still she smiles. She lifts one hand and points to the helm. Then she vanishes, not disappears, unravels, as though made of threads pulled by an unseen tide. You don't sleep again that night. The next day, Captain Lice holds another council. It is smaller now. Fewer trusted souls remain. Some have thrown themselves overboard. Some have wandered below deck and not returned. Some have simply forgotten how to speak. The bone singer brings a box. It is lacquered black, carved with figures of women with broken wings. Inside charms, talismans, teeth. A small mirror cracked down the center. Captain Lice places the mirror on the deck, and then she speaks. When a ship turns on herself, she's either haunted or pregnant. A pause. We've had no ghosts. That leaves only one answer. You don't understand. Not fully, but you suspect what she means. She believes the ship has become something, and something else grows within it. Perhaps a soul, perhaps a child, perhaps a memory made flesh. Her eyes find yours, not directly, just long enough to burn. Then she shatters the mirror with her boot, and from the shards spills water, not glass. Water, salted, still warm. That evening, the crew lays out a rope circle on the deck. You don't ask what it means. You've heard the stories. Once a curse is named, it must be contained. They begin asking questions never to you, but always near you. Who came aboard with no papers? Who scrubbed the deck under a false moon? Who does the compass follow? You stay silent. But silence has become its own kind of confession. Tombo visits you that night. He does not carry a weapon, only a bottle. He offers it to you. You drink. It tastes like burnt sugar and copper. Tell me you're not her, he says. You don't answer. He nods. Didn't think so. He leaves the bottle. You don't drink again. You begin hearing the compass at night. It no longer ticks. It breathes. You press your hand to your chest and feel it match your own breath. In, out, only not quite. It breathes ahead of you, as though you are copying it. One sailor desperate tries to swim away. He leaps into the water at dawn arms, slicing head bobbing toward what he believes is freedom. They lower a boat to fetch him. But when they reach him, they find his body hollow, eyes open, mouth stuffed with seaweed. Inside his chest, a coil of wet rope, wrapped tight, knotted 3 times, like a umbilical cord. The curse is no longer whispered. It is spoken now. The crew believes she walks among them, that she is wearing the skin of someone false, that the compass has found her again. They don't name you, but they don't need to. They leave bread near your hammock, and bits of ribbon, and dried flowers, like offerings, like apologies in advance. And yet, you have done nothing. Nothing except run, except lie, except survive. But the sea does not care about intent. It only remembers presence. And you were there, wherever there was, whenever she sank. You see it now in dreams. A ship aflame, a woman screaming, salt in her lungs, and someone else climbing away while she sank. Someone who looked like you, someone who wore your face. The compass spins faster now. It no longer waits. It has become the center of everything. And deep within you something stirs. Not a voice, not a memory, but a certainty. The curse isn't chasing you. It's trying to come home. When morning finally dares to arrive, it does not come with the kind of clarity and calm that the sailors once prayed for, back when maps still mattered and stars were more than just silent witnesses. No, this morning arrives not as a promise, but as a warning. Its light poured thick across the horizon in a slow, smearing bleed of crimson that seeps between the clouds like ink spilled in a holy book, turning what should have been soft and golden into something strangely violent and utterly wrong. You wake to it, not because someone calls for you, nor because duty demands it, but because the very air itself feels charged, taut with tension, trembling with the kind of electricity that prickles your skin long before your mind understands danger is near. As you climb the creaking steps to the main deck, careful not to rouse the ones who now sleep with their backs to the wall and blades beneath their bedding, you feel it pressing in around you, the sky itself, heavy with implication, as though something ancient and long buried were watching from just beyond the veil of that blood-drenched sky. The wind carries the smell of iron too sharp, too rich to be mere seawater, and too familiar to be dismissed. It is the scent of something spilt and soured, and you know before you see it that the sea has delivered something unwanted to your drifting doorstep. There's already a small circle gathered at the ship's portside rail, and though they say nothing, their posture, their stilled hands, the subtle withdrawal of their breath, the way none of them lean too far forward, all speaks to the same truth. Something floats just beyond the hull, bobbing gently in the gentle roll of the current, a thing that should not be a shape that defies distance until you stand shoulder to shoulder with the nearest sailor and finally look for yourself. It is a body, or what remains of one. At first, you almost mistake it for driftwood, the limbs too long and too pale, the hands curled unnaturally, fingers clawed toward an empty sky. But no bark ever bore fingernails, and no tree ever wore a sailor's shirt stitched with green thread and torn across the middle by what appears to be a spiral of rot spreading outward from the chest like a worm burrowed through flesh and memory alike. But it's the face or the absence of it that steals whatever breath remained in your lungs, where there should be features, eyes, a mouth, perhaps a nose now softened by brine. There is nothing but a flat, smooth expanse of skin, as though someone had carefully peeled back the outer identity of the person and left only the raw suggestion of a human form behind. No orifices, no openings, no expression. Just skin stretched taut and too clean. The body spins slowly in the water, its arm brushing twice against the hull, as if tapping a warning or perhaps seeking permission to return. No one speaks. No one claims him. And yet quietly, wordlessly, every man present understands that this is no stranger. This is not a castaway from another vessel. This is someone who was once here, and more troubling still, someone who has now returned without his face. Captain Lice arrives moments later, her bare feet barely making a sound against the damp deck boards, and for once, no one rushes to part a path before her. She moves among them like smoke, slow, steady, impossible to predict, and halts just short of the rail, her eyes unreadable as they fall on the shape that floats below. You expect her to speak. You even hope for it, for some declaration, some accusation, some ritual that might bind this moment to something the human mind can understand. But instead, she reaches behind her back and draws her dagger, not with menace, but with reverence, as if the blade is not meant to kill, but to name. And then without a word, she cuts her palm open and lets the blood fall over the side. It drips onto the body, and the water boils where it lands, only for a moment, but long enough to leave a welted scar across the corpse's chest, tracing an invisible shape. You feel rather than see a circle split down the center, a spiral drawn with a broken hand, something that stirs in the back of your mind, like a half-remembered lullaby, turned sour in the cradle. When she turns back to face the crew, her hand still dripping, she speaks one sentence. We sail east. No one questions her, not because they agree, but because something in her voice does not allow dissent. Not today. The body is left behind. No rights, no rope, only the compass still spinning, and a dawn that refuses to brighten. As the Midnight Gale shifts course, its sails shuddering with new purpose, the mood aboard hardens. The silence that once hung like fog has deepened into something colder, something more intentional, more calculated. Whispers once rare now cluster like barnacles clinging to conversations that dart between crew members only when they believe themselves safely alone, which on this ship is never. Even the most experienced among them avoid the shadows, choosing instead to sleep in patches of moonlight, as though the light of the stars, when visible, might still hold sway against whatever invisible tide they now travel upon. You are no longer the only one who flinches at reflections. The cook, once talkative to the point of madness, now mutters to his spoons and slaps his own wrists when they begin to stir of their own accord. A sailor named Argon tries to cut out his tongue, but botches it, leaving a jagged, bubbling mess that gurgles more than speaks. The carpenter has started nailing shut the lowest hatches, not to keep something in, but to keep himself from going down there, or so he claims, when caught shivering on the steps, hammer in hand, and breath stolen from his throat. And always, always, that relentless eastward motion toward the rising sun that no longer rises properly toward a horizon that feels more like a mouth than a destination, something open and hungry and impossibly wide. the blood-colored dawn persists for 3 more mornings, each one more vivid than the last, each one seemingly closer, until even the clouds wear shades of rust, and the waves themselves reflect that same unnatural hue, turning the ocean into a sea of diluted fire, lapping gently at the hull, like flames licking at soaked wood, patient and persistent. On the 4th day, another body is found, this one on the deck. It lies beside the compass, curled in the fetal position, arms wrapped around its knees, as though trying to shield itself from something it never managed to outrun. Its skin is dry, shriveled, pale as old wax. The face, if it can still be called that, is contorted into an expression of such profound grief that several of the crew refuse to look at it directly, turning away and crossing themselves or muttering charms in languages none of them have spoken in years. But the worst part isn't the state of the body, it's that no one knows how it got there. No one saw it climb aboard, no one saw it fall from above, no one knows its name. But around its neck hangs a chain, and on that chain is a ring, the same ring Tombeau once gave you, the one you threw into the sea, the one that floated. You feel your heart seize, because now it glimmers with salt and blood. You try to speak, just once, you try to say the word stop, but the word catches in your throat like a hook. You gag, you taste seawater, not metaphor, not memory, actual brine, warm and bitter, rising from your stomach like something living inside you has stirred, angry and uninvited. You spit it into your hand and find a fishbone, small, curved, delicate as a needle. You never swallowed it, but it is there. The ship you think is feeding on you now. That night, in a haze of exhaustion and hunger and something more intangible, a pull, perhaps, or a calling, you find yourself drawn to the helm once more. The compass is no longer just spinning. It pulses, glows. Its needle moves in rhythm with your breath, or perhaps the other way around. You stare, and in its center, in the minuscule point where the needle spins from, you see something shift. Not a reflection, a shape, an eye, looking back at you and blinking. You don't remember walking away. You don't remember collapsing in your hammock, nor how the ship began creaking with unfamiliar music, nor how the bone singer passed your bunk, leaving a trail of salt behind her, like a breadcrumb path meant not for return, but for remembrance. But when you wake, your fingernails are black, and under your pillow is a map, drawn in salt, of an island shaped like an open mouth. You have never seen it, but you know its name, because you have been there before, because you left someone behind, because the sea never forgets, and neither do you. By the time the sun forgets to rise altogether, and the ocean shifts from the blue-black sheen of uncertainty to a more opaque, viscous hue, something not quite natural, not quite fluid, something that seems to clutch at the sides of the ship as though reluctant to let it pass. The stories begin to find their way upward from the lower decks, winding their way through the groaning beams and salt-encrusted corridors like smoke from a fire no one dares admit is burning. It begins as so many whispered truths aboard old ships often do, with a song, a quiet, fractured lullaby barely hummed by the bosun's mate, a man who normally speaks only in whistles and curses, but who on this particular evening seems too lost in thought to notice the way his voice betrays him. The tune is haunting in the way that only childhood songs can be melancholy, not because of its melody, but because it carries with it the weight of something remembered, too late, something soothed only in shadows. You hear it from your corner in the storage hold, where you've taken to resting between shifts, not because it's safer, but because it's easier to hear the truth when no one is watching. It isn't long before others join in, not with voices, not with harmony, but with murmurs that rise from the hammocks and benches and crates, fragments of sentences and slurred recollections, all orbiting the same central figure, one who appears in each version of the tale like a watermark beneath layers of grime, the woman from beneath the waves, the woman who once stood where Captain Lice now does not as captain, but as consort, as confidant, as lover, as something greater, or perhaps far more terrible. They call her various names, though none stick quite as firmly as the title given in a hushed breath by a man named Rue, who after a single cup of fermented fruit rum declares to no one and everyone she was the Black Moon's bride. This phrase stills the room, if only briefly, for it carries with it a kind of weight that language alone cannot explain. The Black Moon, you come to understand, refers not to a celestial body, but to a night. One night. A night that occurred many years ago. How many, no one agrees on, when the sky turned ink dark, even without the presence of clouds, and the stars themselves vanished from sight, as though sucked into some invisible maw that demanded the removal of light to accommodate something far more primal. It was on that night, they say, that the woman was drowned, and not merely drowned in the way sailors sometimes slip beneath the surface and fail to rise again, nor in the tragic fashion of lovers who throw themselves to the sea out of despair. No, her drowning, according to these stories, was deliberate, ritualistic, a sacrifice made not to the ocean, but to something deeper still, something that lives below the floor of the sea, beneath even the trenches, something ancient and faceless, whose hunger is neither random nor cruel, but cyclical, like the tides. Her name, according to the first mate who speaks only when drunk and only when he believes no one is listening, was Solène. You hear the name and feel it reverberate through your chest like a bell rung underwater. Not because you recognize it in any conscious sense, but because something within you answers. Something that shifts, that stirs. Solène the drowned, Solène the beloved, Solène who went under on a moonless night and was never meant to surface. The stories vary in their details, as legends often do, when passed between men who would rather believe than know. Some claim she walked onto the ship, barefoot, a child of the tide, with seaweed for hair and barnacles on her palms. Others insist she was a noblewoman fleeing the gallows who bargained her name away to buy passage and fell in love with Lys, not by design, but by accident, the kind of accident that happens when two storms cross paths and forget to pull apart. In all versions, she is beautiful, in some terrifying, in a few both, but what remains constant is this: she loved the captain, and the captain loved her, and that love, however tender or twisted, ended in betrayal, not necessarily by intention, but by necessity. The sea demanded a debt, and Lys paid it, or watched it be paid, and has never truly spoken of it since. That silence, you now realize, has been the captain's true language all along. Not the silence of command, not the silence of stoicism, but the silence of grief, of guilt, and perhaps of fear. You begin to notice it in her posture, the way she lingers at the rail during the darkest hours, her back no longer ramrod straight, but gently bowed, not in defeat, but in waiting. She does not gaze toward the horizon as sailors do when seeking land, nor upward as if hoping for stars. She looks down into the sea, as if it might open its mouth and speak. One night, when you are sent to deliver her a wrapped parcel of dried fruit and salted meat, a meal no longer served communally. Now that suspicion and superstition have divided the crew into cliques and corners, you find her sitting on a crate, the parcel unopened, her hands clasped loosely before her, and her lips moving soundlessly. You stop short, uncertain whether to approach, but the creak of the board beneath your foot betrays your presence, and she turns her head ever so slightly toward you, not enough to meet your gaze, only enough to acknowledge the noise. She had a voice like tide glass, she says softly, not addressing you directly, but not excluding you either. Fragile, clear, cut you before you even noticed. You say nothing. You cannot. She does not require a reply. She asked me once if I could hear the stars. She continues, her eyes now scanning the heavens where no stars remain. I thought it was poetry. I laughed. She wasn't joking. There is a long pause then, during which only the faint groan of the ship's rigging fills the silence. I thought I had saved her. She says so quietly that the wind nearly steals the words. I thought drowning was the worst the sea could do. She closes her eyes. She was wrong. Then she rises, takes the parcel from your hands, and walks away, her boots echoing down the planks with a finality that leaves your heart ringing. From that moment forward, you begin to see her differently, not merely as the feared captain of a cursed ship, nor as the rumored lover of a drowned woman, but as a woman who once made a choice, perhaps one that she believed was merciful, or necessary, or inevitable, and has spent every day since sailing, not to escape its consequences, but to eventually arrive at them. It is not long after this that the crew's muttering shifts again. No longer do they speak only of the curse as an unnamed entity. Now they begin to link it to a face, to your face, and to hers. 2 women, they say, tied by water, one dead, one disguised, and the sea, always the sea caught in between. You retreat further into yourself, not out of cowardice, but out of preservation. You no longer try to hide your silence, for there is nothing left to hide. Instead, you wear it like a second skin, a veil between you and the minds that have begun to fray around you. You keep to the shadows. You clean what you are told to clean. You sleep when permitted, and you dream always, deep, long, strange dreams that seem to come from beneath your ribs rather than behind your eyes. Dreams filled with bells tolling underwater, of ships sailing in circles around a whirlpool made of hair and of hands, hundreds of hands reaching upward from the ocean floor, not in desperation, but in welcome. And always in the center of those dreams stands a woman with a face you cannot see, but whose silhouette is yours. She does not move, she only waits. Then one night, without reason or warning, the moon returns. But it is wrong. It is too large, too low, too still. It sits on the horizon, like an eye half-lidded in sleep, watching the ship with a kind of passive intent that chills you more than any storm. It is under that moon that the crew finally asks the question aloud. Who among us is Solène? They do not say it to you, but they look at you when they say it, and your throat closes, not in fear, but in recognition, because though you do not remember her life, you remember her death. When the crew can no longer agree on the days of the week, nor count the nights since the stormless sea swallowed their bearings whole, when the moon ceases to wax or wane, and simply looms full, unmoving, ever vigilant, like a glass eye set in the vault of a sky grown bored with its stars, then comes your punishment, or perhaps your reward, for neither are distinguishable anymore. You are assigned the night watch, not once, not in rotation, but indefinitely. No one says it aloud, but you can feel it in the way they hand you the lantern and avert their eyes. No one wants to be above deck when darkness grows thick enough to catch on your clothes. No one wants to witness what the ship becomes when it thinks it's alone. The first night, the captain herself delivers the order. She stands near the stairs leading to the helm, her shadow unusually long behind her, stretched. Not by the moonlight, there is none, but by something deeper, a suggestion of depth, as if the very boards beneath her heels open downward into memory. Her voice is firm, though not unkind, and as she hands you the flint, she says nothing else but, "Don't follow any songs." She does not need to explain what she means. You already know. The lantern they give you is old, rusted at the hinge, with glass smoked from years of use, its handle wrapped in fraying twine that smells faintly of whale oil and something else. Something sweeter, rotted, almost floral. The wick hisses as it catches flame, burning not with gold or amber, but with a pale blue glow. And in that instant, you realize the light doesn't push back the darkness. It simply negotiates with it. The watch begins with small sounds, creaks of the rigging, the soft thrum of sails rubbing themselves to sleep, the rhythmic hush of water brushing the hull. But soon the sounds begin to change. The creaks take on cadence. The sails whisper in what might be syllables. And the water, oh, the water begins to murmur. Not loudly, not intelligibly, but distinctly, as if it is speaking just below the range of your understanding, offering words that only your bones could interpret if you let them. You try not to listen. You focus instead on walking the perimeter, counting your steps between posts, memorizing each knot and coil and bucket and stain. You trace the same pattern again and again until the act becomes hypnotic, until the floor of the ship is no longer something you walk upon, but something that moves beneath you alive, aware, quietly breathing. And then you see the footprints. They're faint at first, barefoot, small, wet. You follow them to the portside rail where they simply stop, not smudged, not faded, just stop, as if their owner stepped into the air and kept walking. You shine your lantern outward. There is no boat, no figure, no sound, only the soft hissing of the sea and the slow, steady turn of the ship's compass, which you now hear even when you're not near it. It ticks like a heartbeat that belongs to someone you once loved and now can't remember. You do not sleep when your watch ends, not because you aren't allowed to, but because your dreams have become too crowded. They wait for you now. They press behind your eyelids the moment you close them. So instead, you sit on the steps near the galley door, lantern in hand, watching the horizon for a dawn that has not returned in days. The second night is worse, because the footprints come back, but they're dry, bone dry, crisp-edged and dusty, as though made by feet that haven't touched water in years. They lead down the steps toward the crew's quarters, and against all reason you follow, not because you want to, but because you must, because they are yours. You recognize the shape, the arch, the scar near the toe. They are your feet, but they move ahead of you, downward, into the dark. You descend with the lantern. At the bottom of the steps, the air is colder, not by temperature, but by memory, as if grief had opened a window and let something hollow rush in. The hammocks creak, though none are occupied. The men sleep now wherever they drop on deck, under benches, against barrels. No one wants to be below anymore, and for good reason. The footprints veer into the old storeroom, the one they boarded up last week, but the door is open. Inside, the candles are lit. Not fresh candles, not warm candles, melted stumps, snuffed out, but still glowing faintly as if waiting to be remembered. You step inside. The door closes behind you. Not slams, not creaks, just closes, as if a breath were exhaled in reverse. And in that moment, the room becomes very still. Not quiet. Still, there is a difference. The kind of stillness you find in the eye of a hurricane. In a room where someone once died. In the second before lightning touches the earth. Then the mirror begins to frost. There had been no mirror before. Now there is, mounted to the wall above a half-collapsed crate of linen rectangular, tarnished at the edges, its glass smeared with salt. You stare into it. You see yourself. You see Solène. You see nothing, all at once. Reflections bloom and vanish like oil on water, layering over one another, cycling through iterations of who you are, who you were, who you might have been, had the sea not taken notice. One reflection remains longer than the others. It smiles. Its mouth is stitched, but it smiles. You raise your hand. It raises a knife. You blink. It's gone. You are alone. You are holding a knife. Where it came from, you do not know, but it's in your hand, and the footprints are behind you now. When you emerge from the hold, the ship is darker than it should be. Lanterns flicker with hesitation. The sails strain as if trying to furl themselves. The wind is not blowing, and yet the ship moves. Always east, always east. You climb to the helm. The compass is still spinning, But the arc is tighter now, more precise, like it has found what it was looking for and is circling it, afraid to land. The night breathes, and in its exhale you hear her name again, not shouted, not whispered, sung, not from above nor from below, but from within. Within the planks, within the salt, within you. From then on, every night watch is the same. The candles are always snuffed, yet always burning. The footprints always begin behind you. The mirror is always gone, yet you remember its weight on the wall. You stop telling anyone, because no one else is awake. Or worse, some are, but choose not to see. Even Tombo avoids you now. He walks wide circles. He leaves bread where you sit, but never speaks. He glances at your shadow more than your face. And the bone singer? She begins to hum your steps as you walk the deck. You test it once, change your rhythm, pause unexpectedly. She adjusts, every time, as if your footsteps were music she already knows by heart. Then one night you find her waiting at the helm. Not the bone singer, the captain. She's barefoot again. Her coat is gone. Her sleeves are rolled. She holds no weapon, only a question. How long have you been her? You don't reply. You don't need to. She walks past you, places her hand upon the compass. It stops. It points, not north, not south, not to any direction known to man. It points to you. You're not cursed, she says softly. You're the beacon. She walks away, and the ship begins to turn. By the 9th week, aboard the Midnight Gale, or what you have come to believe is the 9th week, though no calendar aboard this vessel agrees with itself, and time has long since loosened its grip on anything so orderly as days you no longer distinguish between dream and memory, nor do you attempt to separate what you've heard from what you've witnessed from what you've become. The ship is changing. Yes, but not in the way a ship might age or rot or slowly lose her sails to the patient gnawing of the wind. No, this change is inward, spiraling the way a tree's heartwood darkens after a lightning strike quietly, but irrevocably from the inside out. The hold has become a place few dare to enter, not because it harbors anything visibly dangerous, but because it has grown too quiet, too cold, too resonant. The barrels that once sloshed with brine and rum and pickled eggs now seem to vibrate softly at odd hours, emitting faint sounds that some say are just the ship creaking, but you know better. You've heard your own name echo from the salt barrels. You've heard breathing from the empty gunpowder casks. And so when the cook asks you without meeting your eyes to fetch one of the older barrels from the lowest stack at the back of the hold, you understand at once that this is no errand of necessity, but a test, or perhaps a summons. You descend slowly, lantern in hand, the light flickering with more caution than brightness, casting shadows that cling too tightly to the ribs of the hull. Your fingers graze the sides of crates, etched with old markings, sigils no one aboard now seems able to read, and you pass beneath beams where candles have melted, not downward, but upward, their wax hanging like frozen stalactites, suspended against the rules of the physical world. There is no smell of rot, no sour stench of decay, only the scent of wet parchment, aged ink, and something faintly sweet and wrong like overripe fruit fermenting in candlelight. When you find the barrel in question, round-lidded, sealed, not with wax, but with a strip of knotted kelp that pulses faintly beneath your fingers, you do not try to open it immediately. You simply kneel beside it and listen, pressing your ear to the damp wood, hoping for nothing, expecting anything. And what you hear is not breathing, nor sloshing, nor the rustle of hidden vermin, but a hum, gentle, persistent, low, as though the object inside were dreaming and had not yet decided to wake. You remove the kelp and pry open the lid with the edge of a rusted knife, and within the dark, still interior, you find not pickled herring nor salt-cured lemons, but something wrapped tightly in oilcloth tied with red thread and nestled in what appears to be dried sea sponge. When you unwrap it, your breath catches. It is a letter, but not inked on paper, nor scratched into parchment. It is carved into a piece of whalebone, yellowed, heavy, curved gently at the edges, as though cut from a rib or vertebra. its surface smoothed and burnished to a gleam. The script is delicate, inlaid with a blackened pigment that gleams faintly in the lantern light. You do not recognize the language by name, but you know what it says. You know because the words do not speak to your eyes. They speak to your blood. Your fingers trace the grooves, and the meaning bleeds into you as though the message were returning home. It is not a message for you. It is a message about you. She left beneath a moonless sky, the third of her name wearing silence like a second skin. She was not meant to return. If she does seal the water behind her, burn the voice from her mouth, or she will unmake the tide. Your hands begin to tremble, not with fear but with familiarity. You know the hand that carved this. You see the motion in your memory. Not in your memory, perhaps, but in your hand's memory. The curve of the wrist, the press of the bone beneath your palm. You didn't write this, but you could have, or maybe you did. Once, before you drowned, you return the bone to its wrappings. Rewrap the oilcloth, retie the thread, and reseal the barrel. Not because you mean to hide it, but because some part of you believes it never wanted to be found. Some truths do not want air. They want water, weight, silence. You slide the barrel back into place, but your fingers linger on the lid a moment longer than necessary, and you whisper something beneath your breath, not a word you understand, but one that leaves your mouth nonetheless. The kelp pulses once, then stills. When you return to the deck, no one acknowledges your absence. The bone singer watches you from across the ship, her hands wrapped around a string of black beads carved from driftwood and tooth. She does not speak, but she nods once, slowly. Not in greeting, but in confirmation. She knew you would find it. Perhaps she placed it there. Perhaps you did. The next day, the ocean changes color again. It darkens not with storm, but with history. A red hue tinged with green lingers beneath the surface, like bruises beneath pale skin. The waves are gentle, but they carry with them fragments of something larger. Splinters of ships no one remembers, losing barnacled nameplates etched with letters half-eaten by salt. The flotsam of forgotten navies drifting past as though drawn by a current older than empires. The captain does not call for sails. She does not speak. She merely walks to the prow and watches. She is watching for something, or someone. The crew avoids the bone letter's mention, but they sense its presence in the air. You see it in the way they clutch their knives tighter, in the way they avoid using names, in the way they look to the east, as if hoping it will become west again, if stared at long enough. Tombo sits beside the mast for hours, whittling nothing, his blade dull from overuse. You pass him once, and he stops you with a hand on your arm. There's a reason she was buried in bone, he says without looking up. Skin forgets. Wood rots. But bone keeps memory. It keeps truth. He lifts his eyes to yours. She was meant to stay forgotten. You nod, because you know he's right, and because you no longer believe forgetting is an option. That night the lanterns go out again, all of them. Not with wind, not with water, just out. You feel your way through the dark hands, trailing the damp walls, each plank humming softly beneath your fingers, like a harp out of tune. When you reach your hammock, there is something tucked beneath the fabric, another bone, smaller, smoother. It is warm. You do not unwrap it. You hold it against your chest and you sleep. And in your dreams she sings to you. Her mouth is still sewn shut, but the song fills the ship, and it sounds like home. By the time you are sent below the salt deck, deep into the narrow-bellied chamber that even the rats seem reluctant to claim as their own, the rest of the ship has already begun to behave as if you belong to a different kind of crew, entirely. As if the you that scrubs floors and fetches tar and slices salted fish with a blade dulled by secrecy is not the same you who dreams in languages that make old men weep. The other sailors, once merely wary or bemused by your presence, have grown tight-lipped and restless, their glances more calculated, their silences denser. The rituals once whispered for luck now shift to protection. Knots tied backward, iron nails left in boots, charms sewn into sleeves, as though every member aboard the Midnight Gale has begun to prepare, not for mutiny or battle, but for exorcism. The order to clean the bilge comes from the boatswain, whose voice, usually coarse and irritated like a barn door in a storm, is unusually hushed when he finds you beside the anchor chain. He does not meet your eyes, nor offer the mocking jabs he once so freely hurled in your direction. Instead, he points downward and says, "It's yours now," as though passing on a burden rather than assigning a chore. You do not ask why. You already know that questions aboard this ship are rarely answered with anything more than silence or worse stories that rewrite you by the end. The descent into the bilge is not a path marked by stairs or ladders, but by gestures. A rope here, a crack in the wall there, a place where the boards have warped to make room for something that was never supposed to grow. The further you crawl, the more the ship changes around you. The air thickens not with rot or mold, but with age, a layered heaviness that clings to your skin like warm cloth dipped in memory. It is wet, yes, and the planks sweat with brine, but it is not the wet of leaks or fresh seepage. It is the wet of something that has remained undisturbed for so long, it has forgotten how to breathe. You take the lantern with you, but it begins to dim almost immediately. The flame flickers and shrinks with each level you descend, as though starved not of oxygen, but of permission. Shadows lengthen and stretch into unfamiliar shapes. They do not behave like reflections, but like listeners drawn closer with every movement you make. It is not darkness that surrounds you, it is witness. When you finally reach the bilge floor, you expect to find the usual detritus of a working ship, pooled water flecks of tar, discarded rope, perhaps a broken tool left behind by some exhausted soul. Instead, you find the planks too clean, not in a tidy, swept sort of way, but in the unsettling cleanliness of something scoured, something washed not by hand, but by necessity. The floor is bare, no puddles, no stains, only a wide, flat expanse of damp wood, bowed slightly inward, as if the ship itself had bowed its spine toward some ancient submission. At first, you see only the chains, heavy, rust-streaked, tangled across the floor in a serpentine coil that suggests no modern hand arranged them. You kneel and touch them, and though the metal is old, pitted by time, it does not flake or crumble. Instead, it pulses once like a slow heartbeat. You draw your hand back. The chains are attached to iron loops embedded deep into the ship's ribbing. This is not surprising in and of itself. Many ships bear remnants of old uses, especially those that have been refitted and repurposed. But as you trace the rusted bolts with your lantern's light, you realize that the grain of the wood surrounding each anchor point has grown around the iron, as though the planks themselves accepted the intrusion centuries ago. These chains were not added later. They were built into the ship, and they are far older than the ship. Your breath catches not from fear, but from the sheer impossibility of it. The Midnight Gale was constructed, depending on which story you believe, either by smugglers from Marseille in the late 1660s, or by exiles from the Portuguese coast after a mutiny disbanded their navy. Either way, she is just over a decade old. Yet the style of these shackles, the type of forging, the depth of iron bloom, they are not 17th century relics. They are older, much older. The patterns etched faintly into their curvature resemble those found in abbey crypts, in crusader ossuaries, in places where the dead are more than buried, they are sealed. You shine the lantern closer, and as the light wavers, you see that the floorboards beneath the chains are carved not with names, but with a spiral repeated again and again in alternating directions, each loop catching the next, forming a continuous pattern of inward collapse. It is not decorative. It is a warning, a ward, a cage. You find at the far end of the chamber what first appears to be another chain, but it is a spine. Vertebrae large and human-shaped, yet wrong in the proportions, too elongated, too compressed near the base, fused in ways no human body ever should be. The spine is petrified, blackened by time, and shackled at both ends with rings that match those embedded in the ship's side. You do not cry out. You cannot. You simply kneel and stare, because you recognize it, not from dreams, not from story, but from within. You've carried the spine, you've borne its weight, you've screamed beneath it, and now here it lies silent and whole. You rise slowly and begin to clean, not because the boatswain asked it of you, but because your hands need something to do some task to keep them from trembling. You scrub the floor with salt water and ash, the same mixture once used in monastery rites, to cleanse relics that were not holy, but hollow. As you clean, you whisper to yourself, not words, not sentences, but fragments of song. Not your voice, but hers. Salt in the cradle, stitch in the sea, turn back the breath, unmake me. Each line arrives unbidden, each verse anchoring you deeper until the bilge no longer smells of brine or dust, but of lavender and burnt silk, of old beds and forgotten lullabies. You pause, brush aside a loose board, and find something else. A tooth, long, curved, too large to be human, too delicate to be animal. It lies atop a piece of cloth once white, now yellowed with embroidery at the hem and thread, so faded it almost blends with the weave. But you see it, one letter, an S. You fold the cloth gently, tuck it inside your shirt, and do not speak of it. Not to the boatswain, not to Tom Bow, not even to the captain. Because you are beginning to understand that your silence was not a disguise, it was a memory, a rehearsal. And now beneath the salt deck, among bone and chain and memory, the silence has returned to you, and it speaks. That evening, when you climb back above deck, the crew parts to let you pass, not out of fear, not yet, but out of deference. They see it on you now, in your eyes, in the way your steps fall into rhythm with the creak of the hull. You no longer move like someone hiding. You move like someone remembering. The bone singer does not ask what you found. She simply offers you a cup of warm black water that tastes like stone and honey, and she hums a tune as you drink it. A tune you recognize from the chains. The captain nods as you pass her cabin. Nothing more. She knows. They all do. And that night, when you lie down in your hammock, your dreams do not come from above or below. They rise from the floor beneath you, and the ship breathes. It begins as all things aboard the Midnight Gale now seem to, with a change in the wind subtle at first, almost imperceptible, like the shift in tension before an unwelcome visitor knocks at your door, or the way an old house seems to grow silent just before its walls begin to speak. After weeks of stagnant air and a sea as flat and still as a held breath, the sudden gust that slithers across the deck on that gray morning is met not with relief, but with unease, for it carries with it a chill that does not belong to weather alone, and a scent that none of the crew can name without looking away, as though to do so would be to admit its source was never natural at all. By midday, clouds have gathered into formations that resemble bruises, more than storms, deep violet and copper at the edges, pressing down upon the ship like the low ceiling of a chapel no longer sanctified. The light that filters through the sails is no longer golden, but jaundiced, tainted with something green and ill. Still, no one suggests lowering anchor or trimming sail or even turning back, because by now, everyone understands that the ship no longer responds to direction, that her course is chosen not by stars or compasses, but by some interior will, that none of them have the strength or perhaps the right to challenge. It is under this oppressive sky that the first notes are heard. At first, they are mistaken for wind that peculiar keening sailors often attribute to the howling of old ghosts through taut rigging. But there is something more deliberate in this sound, something melodic and painfully human. A rising and falling rhythm that lingers just outside the threshold of full recognition. It is not loud. In fact, its softness is what makes it so terrible, because it reaches you no matter where you are on the ship, winding its way through planks and walls, between coils of rope and through the mouths of empty barrels. It sounds like a woman singing, but you know there is no woman aboard. Not anymore. Not besides the captain, and the sound is not hers. This voice is higher, thinner, and strangely tender, as though whoever it belongs to has been singing for so long that the melody no longer belongs to anyone at all. You are near the galley when you hear it clearly for the first time. The voice slips between two gusts of wind, riding the spray of salt that crashes up from the bow, and for one moment, just one, you feel yourself caught, not in surprise or fear, but in longing. The voice is not beautiful in the way a trained singer's voice might be. It is cracked, weathered thin at the edges, but rich with sorrow. So much so that you find yourself blinking hard against tears that were not summoned by pain or memory, but by recognition. You know that voice. You should not, but you do. You carry a pail of potatoes in your arms, water sloshing around your ankles from the overflow of barrels left open too long. The voice wraps itself around the motion of your body like a shawl, warm and suffocating. You do not stop moving. If you stop, you know the voice will grow louder, or perhaps you fear it will stop, because then you would miss it, because then it would mean it had reached someone else. Others hear it too. You see it in the way sailors look over their shoulders without pretending they were only checking the lines. You see it in the way men begin tying knots they've already tied over and over until their hands bleed. You see it in the way Tombo, who once claimed to have heard mermaids sing and lived to tell the tale, now carries a scrap of red cloth sewn into his sleeve like a ward. He speaks little now, and when he does, his voice is coarse with salt, his words chosen carefully, as though even the wrong syllable might summon her closer. That evening the first storm breaks, not in the way a proper storm might, ripping through sails, tossing cargo, shouting with thunder, but in a steady, smothering downpour that drowns the ship in silence. Rain falls so thickly it mutes every sound but one, the singing. It is louder now, though not by volume, but by presence. You no longer merely hear it. You feel it in the walls of your chest, in the delicate bones of your wrists, in the soft webbing between your fingers. It curls inside you like smoke, a melody, half remembered from lullabies you were never meant to survive. You are tasked with watching the storm from the upper deck, a duty no one wanted, but everyone knew would be yours. Rain lashes at your face, and your oilskin cloak does little to shield you, but the cold is not what unnerves you. It's the warmth of the voice, how it grows clearer the longer you stand exposed, as though your listening is being rewarded. She is singing in a language you do not know, but understand nonetheless. Each note is a question, each breath an answer. You strain to locate the source, but the sound has no origin. It is all around you, above and beneath and within. You climb the steps toward the helm, hoping that standing higher might help. And as you do, you notice the compass has finally stopped spinning. It now points west. You blink. The ship has not turned, and yet the compass insists, not with a twitch or flutter, but with a firm, unwavering needle that points directly into the heart of the storm, into the voice, into her. You do not tell the captain. She already knows. You see her standing at the prow, rain cascading over her shoulders like morning veils. She does not move, not even when lightning flashes so close to the mast that the wood steams. Her eyes are open. Her hands are bare. She listens, And you realize then that she is not afraid. She is grieving. She is waiting. In the hours that follow, the ship begins to shift. Not in direction no rudder dares defy her course, but in timber, in temperature, in texture. The wood beneath your boots softens slightly, becomes almost pliable like driftwood left too long in tide pools. Nails work themselves loose from the masts. Ropes begin to fray without friction. Salt blooms across the deck in crystalline patterns that match the embroidery you once found on that folded cloth. The ship is becoming something else, or perhaps it is becoming itself, and you caught in the center feel the song begin to change. Where once it had been gentle, mournful, a cry for remembrance, it now deepens into a different rhythm, one less about sorrow and more about return. The melody thickens. The words gain form, and you begin to mouth them, not because you know them, but because they are already written on your tongue. You do not realize you are singing until the crew starts to look at you, not in anger, not in horror, but in something worse, acceptance, as if they had been waiting, as if this were always meant to happen. A sailor named Renard throws himself from the rigging. No scream, no cry, just a slow step into the void. He hits the water and does not rise. You hear the voice stop, just for a moment. Then it begins again, louder, closer. You wake the next morning with salt in your mouth and a song on your lips. The storm has passed, the ship is dry, but the melody lingers, in the rigging, in the ropes, in the bones of the mast. You speak it aloud, once, just once, and your voice echoes not outward, but downward into the ship's belly, and something answers, not with words, but with harmony. Tombeau finds you near the bowsprit that evening, seated with your legs tucked beneath you, watching the horizon through narrowed eyes. He does not speak at first, only stands behind you, shifting his weight like a man unused to stillness. "You're singing in your sleep now," he says finally. You nod. "Who taught you the song?" You shake your head, but then unexpectedly you answer, "She did." He stiffens, then lowers himself beside you. The rain begins again, light, tentative, like the early drops of a storm learning to speak. Tombeau stares at the sea. "She's not angry, you know," he says. You glance at him. "She's waiting." You nod again, and the compass turns west, again. By the time the hull scraping is ordered, the Midnight Gale has ceased to feel like a vessel obeying the wind or the tides, and instead behaves more like a breathing organism, one whose moods shift with the temperature of the sea, whose groans and creaks sound increasingly less like wood resisting strain and more like bones adjusting beneath heavy skin, and whose silence, once merely oppressive, now feels watchful, as if the ship herself listens not to the orders barked from the captain or the desperate prayers whispered into hammocks, but to something deeper. Perhaps the voice of the ocean itself, or perhaps the echo of something still chained to its belly, tugging gently with each swell of the waves. The order comes not as a suggestion, nor as a routine command, but as a necessity, framed in the tight-clipped voice of the first mate, whose recent demeanor, once blustering and officious, has withered into the quiet desperation of a man who believes that purpose and clarity can somehow push back against madness. He gathers 3 of the more capable sailors' men who still respond promptly, who do not sleep with open eyes or sing in their sleep, and announces that the hull must be scraped clean of barnacles and moss, though he cannot or will not say why. His gaze flickers briefly to the compass still locked westward, and then to you, but he says nothing more. You are not chosen for the dive, though you suspect that's not because they wish to protect you, but rather because they are no longer certain what the water would do if it felt you returning to it, whether it would swallow you whole or split apart to offer you a throne. The 3 men descend just after dawn, sliding into the water on ropes, their bodies glistening with oil and apprehension. You remain on deck, standing near the edge, your hands gripping the railing, not for balance, but for grounding, as the morning light breaks through the clouds with the kind of cautious reverence reserved for places that no longer welcome the sky. The sea looks still, but you know better. You can feel its tremble beneath the ship's belly, a subtle throb, like the pulse of a creature waiting for something to begin. The first few minutes pass in silence. Then come the shouts, not words, just muffled gasps and frantic splashing. 2 heads breach the surface, followed seconds later by a third, all 3 men panting eyes wide with something more than exertion. One of them, a dark-eyed sailor named Jules, throws a handful of barnacles onto the deck, muttering curses between heaves. Another simply climbs aboard and stares at his own hands as though they had done something he cannot forgive. But it is the third, the youngest, barely more than a boy, who sets the others reeling. Because when he surfaces, he brings with him not barnacles or kelp, but something clutched tightly in his left hand, something wrapped so carefully it must have been found with purpose. It is a lock of hair, thick, dark, still wet, still knotted, still tied with a ribbon of red silk so faded and frayed that it must have spent a lifetime underwater, and yet it shines faintly, as if pleased to be back in the air. The deck grows still. Even the captain, who stands several feet away watching with the wary focus of someone who suspects she already knows what has been found, turns sharply at the sight. No one touches it. The boy sets the lock of hair on the deck beside a bucket and steps back, trembling. He does not speak. You do not either, because you recognize that ribbon, not as a thing you've owned, but as a thing that once was you. It is Tombeau who breaks the silence, stepping forward slowly, his boots echoing too loudly on the wood. He crouches beside the lock of hair, eyes narrowed, nostrils flaring, as if trying to sense something beyond what sight alone could offer. Then he lifts the ribbon, not the hair, only the ribbon, and holds it up to the light. You expect him to comment, to mock, to warn, but he does none of those things. Instead, he lifts his free hand and points to you, not with fear, not with anger, but with certainty. It's hers. No one asks who. No one needs to. The crew begins to shift after that, not in dramatic gestures, not in the kind of mutinous frenzy old tales relish, but in the small, almost imperceptible ways that signal true change. Men sleep further apart. No one touches the rigging without gloves. Meals are taken in silence, even the cook no longer humming over his boiling pots. And the song, the one that once drifted faintly through the sails like a memory trying to surface, no longer feels external. It comes now from within, from the planks, from the ropes, from your breath. That night, you are drawn once again to the lower deck, to the space just above the bilge, where the salt never fully dries, and the air carries a constant tension, as though the ship resents each breath you take inside her. You go not because you are told to, but because your body moves before your thoughts have caught up, each footfall landing in place, as though following a choreography you had rehearsed long ago. You find the ribbon again, not in your hand, not on the deck, but woven now into the rigging near the mast, a place no one should have reached. No sailor would have fastened it, and no wind could have carried it. It flutters gently despite the still air, and you reach for it with a hesitation born not from fear, but from awe. When your fingers graze it, you feel something like warmth, and then a whisper not heard but understood. I remember you. You do not drop the ribbon. You do not tuck it away. You tie it around your wrist, and the ship exhales. The following day, the captain summons a council not at her quarters, not below deck, but in full view of the sea at the forwardmost part of the ship, where the prow juts out like the blade of a spear, poised not to strike, but to pierce memory itself. She speaks little. She no longer has to. Her authority is no longer derived from her orders, but from the silence that surrounds them, a silence everyone now fears more than her voice. She holds up the lock of hair, still damp, still knotted, and says only this. We sail toward her. She does not name who, she does not name where, and no one argues. They simply nod, because they have seen what lies beneath the hull. They have heard the voice in the rain. They have felt the memory tighten its grip, and they know now that the ship is not cursed. It is claimed. You spend that night alone near the anchor chains, the ribbon still tied to your wrist, its ends curling slightly from the salt. You no longer sleep as others do, not in full, not in peace, but you drift, eyes half closed, breath slowing, and in that liminal space between waking and surrender, you feel the sea rise within you, not in waves, but in rhythm, not in song, but in pulse. She is close, closer than she has ever been, and the ship knows it, and so do you. The strange sense of convergence of timelines collapsing and folding inward like sails pulled too tight against a mast deepens after the incident with the lock of hair, and as each passing day unfolds, not with clarity, but with a kind of heavy inevitability, the ship itself seems to press in closer around you, not physically, but spiritually, as though the midnight gale no longer wishes to simply carry you, but instead seeks to envelop you entirely, to reclaim you as part of whatever living memory it drags through the water, like a ghost trailing its own shadow. The sensation is not immediate, nor is it dramatic, but it is unmistakable. You feel it in the way the floorboards now seem to shift, just slightly under your bare feet, bending not to wait, but to will in the way doors you have never seen before crack open without breeze, inviting you into spaces that do not appear on any diagram you've glimpsed, and most of all, in the way your thoughts drift more often to questions you no longer need to ask aloud, because the answers already echo quietly in the back of your skull, half spoken in your own voice. It is during one of these strange wanderings, ostensibly, under the guise of checking the lamp oil supplies, though in truth, you move simply to move, compelled not by duty, but by the magnetic pull of a place that has begun to breathe with your breath, that you find the logbook. You do not find it by looking, you find it by stumbling, quite literally. A loose board, a slick patch of seawater on the stairs, a moment's inattention, and you're falling forward, arms flailing until your shoulder strikes a cabinet door that was until now firmly shut, with a lock no one claimed to possess. The cabinet swings open, not with resistance, but with a soft sigh, and there, tucked beneath a rolled map of sea lanes, long since erased by storms, lies the captain's ledger, a thick-bound tome of darkened leather, too heavy to be simply carried for the sake of bureaucracy, too ornate to be mistaken for routine inventory. You should not touch it, you know that, but your hands reach before your caution does, and you lift it from its resting place, feeling the way the spine breathes against your palms, the pages curling slightly as though waking from a long slumber. It falls open without your command, settling somewhere in the middle, not at the most recent entries, but not far from them either, as though the book already knows what you've come to see. The handwriting is unfamiliar, yet strangely beautiful, angular, but fluid. Not the scrawl of an illiterate deckhand, but the deliberate script of someone who writes with purpose. The ink, dark and faintly iridescent, catches the light in a way ink should not. You scan the names, crew listings, dates of boarding, departures, deaths. Some names have been crossed out, others underlined. A few bear no comment at all, as though their presence required no explanation. You find your name 5 lines from the top of the left-hand page, not the name you gave when you boarded, not the false identity you conjured on the wharf in desperation. Your real name, the one you haven't spoken aloud in years, the one only your mother ever whispered while combing your hair beside the riverbank before she disappeared, and the village began to whisper that the tide had taken her for a reason. It is written clearly, dated 2 weeks before your arrival. You stare at it until the letters blur. You trace them with one finger, expecting, hoping that they'll smear, that the ink will run, that this will reveal itself as some cruel prank or madman's guess. But the ink remains dry, permanent. You flip backward through the pages, skimming earlier entries in mounting disbelief, and find the name again. Not just yours, variations of it, earlier versions, older languages. The same pattern repeating itself across generations of voyages, etched by different hands in different scripts, always accompanied by the same note. Passenger, unlisted, essential. The word essential is underlined. You shut the book too fast, too hard, and for a moment the air in the room vanishes, as though the ship itself has paused in sympathy or recognition. When you open your eyes again, you're still holding the ledger, still standing beside the open cabinet, still alone. But you do not feel alone. You do not tell the captain, not because you fear punishment, but because some part of you senses that she already knows, that she too once found her name in that book, or perhaps the name of someone she had once tried to forget. You recall the way she looked at you that first week, not with suspicion or curiosity, but with sorrow. The sorrow of someone who has already seen how the story ends, but is bound by duty to sail through it anyway. Instead, you carry the knowledge with you, like a weight stitched beneath your skin, a secret that burns not with fear, but with inevitability. The ship has not trapped you. It has found you. Or perhaps it has been carrying versions of you for longer than you have existed in this form. And this journey is merely the latest loop in a spiral that refuses to break. You see it now in the faces of the crew, how they look past you, through you, around you. Not because you are invisible, but because you are recognized. You are not a stranger among them anymore. You are a chapter they never read aloud, but whose words they remember nonetheless. Even the bone singer, once cautious in her approach, now hums a different tune when you pass. Her eyes follow you with a curious blend of reverence and dread, as though you have become both relic and prophecy. She gives you a tooth carved with a sigil you cannot name, but which matches the one beside your name in the ledger. She says nothing when she gives it. You say nothing when you accept. That night the ship shifts course again. The compass, which had pointed unwaveringly west since the storm, begins to spin once more, not wildly, not in panic, but in slow, deliberate arcs that trace a pattern invisible to the eye, but deeply felt in the belly. You feel it before anyone else, a subtle change in pitch beneath your feet, a new note added to the song that has haunted the sails for days. The ship is circling now, searching, remembering, and it is doing so with the knowledge that you are aboard. You feel the gaze of the ocean, not as an external force, but as an internal mirror, something that watches from within your own reflection. When you pass the glass near the helm, you see not just your face, but hers, the woman who drowned, who sang, who waits. You touch your cheek. She does the same, but there is no malice in her expression, only recognition. Later, long past midnight, when the rain begins to fall in soft rhythmic pulses, the captain approaches you. She says nothing at first, only stands beside you near the railing, her eyes on the dark horizon. Her coat is soaked. Her boots are muddy with the salt slick from the deck. Her hair clings to her cheeks like seaweed. But her voice, when it finally breaks, the silence is steady. I found my name once too, she says. Not in the log, in a dream. A dream so old it tasted like vinegar. You do not respond, she continues. It was carved into the wall of a ship I'd never seen before. And beneath it, written in a child's hand, was the phrase, "You still owe us." You turn to her slowly. She does not look at you. I never figured out who us was, she murmurs. But I knew I wasn't meant to survive that voyage. A long pause. Then and yet here I am. You watch the water. She walks away. You return to the cabinet the next day. The ledger is gone. In its place only a mirror. You stare into it, and see nothing, not even your own reflection, only the sea. The ship, which once bore the illusion of following the will of its crew or the whims of the sea, now seems to bend around you in ways too subtle to articulate yet too precise to ignore, responding to your presence not with fanfare or open acknowledgement, but with the kind of pervasive attentiveness that suggests it no longer considers you simply a passenger or even a stowaway, but rather a necessary piece in a design whose shape only the hull itself remembers. You notice it in the way the boards beneath your feet no longer creak in protest at your weight, how the sails above fall into sync with your steps as you cross the deck, how lanterns that sputter and die at the approach of others burn steadily in your hands as though drawing breath from your very fingertips. And yet it is not the ship alone that has begun to respond differently, but those aboard it first with glances, then with pauses in conversation, and now with an open, unspoken consensus that whatever you were before, whatever role you played as the mute cabin boy lurking on the fringes of chores and shadows, is no longer sufficient to shield the truth that pulses more visibly with each passing hour. The change is no longer yours to hide. It belongs to everyone now. It begins with your voice, not a scream, not a whisper, not even a song, but a word, one you do not intend to speak, one that rises unbidden from the deepest part of your throat, thick with salt and memory. You are cleaning the copper rails near the captain's quarters when it slips from your lips, a name soft and unfamiliar yet resonant with meaning you do not question. It is not your name, not precisely, but it is yours in a way that transcends labels a syllable, that carries the shape of your breath before you had breath to shape words. You hear it leave your mouth and feel the air recoil the ship's timbers, groaning faintly beneath your knees, as if adjusting to accommodate the echo. The first to respond is the bone singer. She emerges from the lower deck almost instantly, her eyes wide, but not with shock, with certainty. She does not approach, does not question. She merely removes one of the bone chimes from her belt, kisses it, and lays it carefully at your feet, as if offering it not to you, but to whatever has begun to awaken within your skin. She whispers a phrase you cannot quite make out, though you understand its purpose to protect, or perhaps to surrender. The second is Tombo. He says nothing, but that evening you find your hammock stripped of its blanket, and your name, if it was ever written, scratched out from the crew's roster nailed beside the galley door. No one mentions the change. No one needs to. You have outlived your disguise, and the role you once played, the illusion of anonymity, has been cast off like wet cloth. The crew no longer speaks around you. They simply cease speaking at all in your presence, as though your very breath now disrupts the fragile agreements that once kept the fear in check. The third is the sea. It begins to sing again, but this time in harmony with your heartbeat. The melody that once drifted from the waves like a siren's lament now comes from within, not from memory, not from madness, but from a kind of ancestral clarity, as if the salt in your veins has remembered a rhythm long suppressed, and with each beat of your heart, the ship responds, not by groaning or lurching, but by adjusting itself incrementally in your direction, sails tightening not in anticipation of the wind, but in deference to your breath. And then the dreams return, but no longer as flickering shadows or half-formed symbols bleeding across your closed eyelids. Now they come fully formed, sequential, vivid in their detail, and undeniable in their intent. You dream of the woman again, the one whose face never stays the same, whose voice always knows the next line of the song before you can sing it. But now she does not beckon. She waits. You see her seated in a circle of dark stones, her hair tangled with seaweed, her eyes covered not with cloth, but with barnacles that bloom like wounds. She opens her mouth and speaks your name, not the name you use, not the name you answer to, but the name that the bones below the deck remember. She speaks it, and you wake, tasting iron. You are not alone in these dreams. You see across the hammocks and passageways others waking at the same hour, clutching their chests, gasping quietly, glancing toward your berth with looks not of accusation, but of recognition. They too have seen the stones. They too have heard the voice. One sailor, a grizzled man named Faro, who had once prided himself on knowing every current between the Azores and the Antilles, approaches you on the fourth morning, trembling with something that might be awe or might be terror, and places a finger gently on your temple. She was you, he mutters, and you were the storm, and he says nothing more. You do not see him again. The captain makes no move to isolate you, no effort to condemn or protect. Instead, she begins watching you with the quiet attention of someone who has made peace with a long-feared outcome, whose only remaining duty is to bear witness as prophecy fulfills itself in slow, deliberate increments. She no longer questions your presence on her ship. She simply adjusts course. You feel it in the turn of the wheel, the slight shift of angle that steers the Midnight Gale not away from danger, but toward it. And then, without warning, the voice, the one that has haunted every storm, every dream, every knot of hair or carved bone left beneath your pillow, stops, not in retreat, but in arrival. You hear nothing from the sea, nothing from the wind, only silence. And then a single word from the captain, spoken not to you, but to the ship itself. She's here. The next few hours unfold with a stillness so complete it seems unnatural. No waves lap against the hull, no sails creak, no birds circle overhead. It is as though the world itself has held its breath. You stand at the bow with the rest of the crew, though none of them stands beside you. They keep their distance, forming a broken semicircle, as if unsure whether they are witnesses or participants in a ritual that no longer belongs to them. Even the bone singer, usually so composed, clutches her chimes with both hands and hums a melody so faint it sounds more like breath than music. And then you see it, far on the horizon, a figure, alone, floating, no boat beneath her, no storm surrounding her, just water and presence. You do not wait for the ship to draw nearer. You walk to the edge of the bow, place one hand upon the rail, and without looking back, you speak. I know you. The words do not echo. They are not repeated. They are absorbed by the ship, by the sea, by the self you used to be. You turn. The captain nods once, then steps aside. Below deck, the mirror has returned, the one from the cabinet, now mounted to the keel beam in a place no one would have hung it unless they wished for it to be found. You approach it not with dread, but with a kind of weary acceptance. You no longer expect clarity. You no longer need it. In the mirror, you see two figures. One is you, the other is her. Your eyes meet, and then for the first time she smiles, not in cruelty, not in warning, but in welcome. The curse you understand now was never about death or madness or vengeance. It was about memory. It was about return, and you have returned. By now, the journey has lost its sense of progression in the traditional linear sense. There is no more talk of leagues traveled, no careful noting of stars, no measuring of time in the rhythm of meals or shifts, or the slow growth of barnacles on the hull. Instead, the voyage has become cyclical tidal ritualistic in a way that defies charts or navigational logic, and as the ship turns toward its unseen destination, one that no map has ever acknowledged, you begin to understand that the Midnight Gale does not travel through space alone, but through memory, through layers of forgotten choices, and through stories too heavy to be carried by any one soul. The sea has grown stranger still. The waters ahead no longer reflect the sky, and when you peer over the railing, you see not your face mirrored back, but shifting images, flashes of rooms, You have never entered corridors lined with lit candles that flicker at your approach, a staircase spiraling endlessly down into the depths of the ocean. In one moment, you catch sight of your younger self barefoot and drenched, whispering words to someone who wears your face in reverse. In another, you see bones piled neatly at the bottom of a reef, each inscribed with markings that glisten not with decay but with gold. No one speaks of landfall. No one questions whether the voyage will ever end, because now it is clear that an ending is not something granted, it is something earned or perhaps inherited, and not everyone will be permitted to reach it. The first to understand this is the quartermaster, a silent man named Arlo, who has rarely spoken more than a grunt since you boarded. You find him one evening near the prow, his belongings folded into a bundle beside him, his expression calm, as if he'd long suspected this moment would come. He hands you a length of weathered cloth embroidered with symbols you vaguely recall from your dreams, the same sigils that appeared around the woman in the circle of stones. "You'll need this," he says, as though the cloth were more than fabric, as though it were a key. Then, with no farewell, he walks backward off the ship. He does not fall. He steps, as though onto solid ground, and the water accepts him curling up to receive his body, like the arms of an old friend. He vanishes, not with splash or struggle, but as though he had always been part of the ocean's surface, briefly emerged, and now returned. No one calls out. No one tries to stop him. The crew simply watches, and quietly begins to prepare. You feel it then, subtle but absolute, that there will be a division, a sorting, not based on merit or loyalty or the whims of command, but on something far older and far deeper, a knowing. The ship knows, the sea knows, and somewhere within you, you begin to know as well. Those who must go ashore will go, and those who must stay will stay. You are not among the deciding voices, because you are no longer only a voice. You are part of the vessel now, part of its memory and its purpose. You feel its ribs thrum in response to your pulse, its sails tighten with the rhythm of your breath. You are no longer hiding. You are no longer pretending. Whatever curse you thought you carried was never truly yours. It belonged to the ship and through it to something older. That night the captain calls a final gathering. The crew assembles on the main deck beneath a sky that refuses to reveal stars, and she stands before them not as commander, not even as equal, but as a final witness to their names. She does not read them aloud. She does not divide them by roles or rank. She simply walks down the line, placing a hand on each shoulder, nodding once if the person is to remain, twice if they are to go. No one argues. No one weeps. Each touch of her hand is met with the stillness of acceptance, as though the outcome had always been known and was only now being confirmed. When she reaches you, she pauses longer than she has for the others. You feel her breath slow. Her fingers hover near your shoulder, and then she lowers her hand, does not touch you at all. She meets your eyes, and though she says nothing, you understand. You are not part of the choosing. You are the reason there is a choice. The ship alters course that night, not with a turn of the wheel or a shift in wind, but with the slightest lean of its spine, the barest change in tension that pulls the hull towards something no one can see, but everyone can feel. The air grows thicker, heavier, rich with the scent of salt and iron and old smoke, as though the world you are nearing is one that burns slowly beneath the waves, waiting for the return of those it has lost. You sleep little. The dreams are different now, no longer disjointed fragments or warnings veiled in metaphor, but whole memories stitched together in unfamiliar patterns. You see faces you've never met but know intimately. You stand on shores made of bone. You walk through a forest of masts and tattered sails, where the trees whisper in languages drowned centuries ago. You see the woman again, no longer weeping, no longer waiting, but stepping forward, her hands outstretched, her voice, no longer a melody, but a name. yours. And in the final dream, you look down and see your reflection, not in a mirror, not in water, but in her eyes. You are her, she is you, not in body, but in story, in echo, in purpose. At dawn the land appears, not rising like an island, not emerging like a coast, but revealing itself as though it had always been there, just beyond the edge of vision, cloaked in mist and silence. It is not lush or welcoming. There are no birds, no beaches, no smoke rising from chimneys. Only black stone and tide-worn cliffs, and a single stretch of shoreline lined with what appear to be broken figureheads from 100 lost ships, each one cracked, each one watching. You do not anchor. The ship simply slows, and the chosen few begin to descend. They do not bring supplies. They do not carry weapons, only the objects they were given, cloths, trinkets, bones, names. Each of them touches the railing once before leaving, and each one vanishes into the mist without turning back. You remain on the deck. The remaining crew, all those who were not chosen, return to their tasks, but they do so without urgency, without pretense. There is no more sailing to be done, no more horizons to chase. The Midnight Gale is not a ship of transport now. It is a vessel of memory, a keeper of truths that no one else dared hold. The bone singer ties a final chime to the mast. The captain hands you the key to her quarters, and then she too descends. You are the only one left at the helm. The sea begins to sing again, but now it is your voice. You do not remember when you began to hum, only that the song has no beginning and no end, only verses that loop and shift like tide and time. You sing not to call anyone back, not to mourn those who have gone ashore, but to anchor yourself in the rhythm of the ship, in the heartbeat of the wood, in the pulse of the water. You understand now that this was never about escape. It was about restoration. You do not feel cursed. You feel inevitable. As the final chimes settle into silence and the last footstep vanishes into mist, you feel the ship shift once more. Not in panic, not in movement, but in stillness. It settles. It rests. And you with it. The sea too is quiet. No waves, no wind, only the deep, slow breathing of something ancient that has finally remembered its name. And you standing at the wheel, with hands no longer trembling, eyes no longer searching. Understand what it means to be part of something eternal. Not a ghost, not a curse, but a story, one that must be remembered and sung and kept. The sky has softened now. The harsh edges of cloud and salt are gone, replaced by a hush so complete it feels like velvet pressed against the inside of your skull. Muffling thought, slowing breath, dimming the bright flares of memory into something warmer, something manageable. The ship rocks only slightly beneath your feet, and each creak of its timbers feels more like a lullaby than a warning. There is no urgency, no destination, only rhythm, only sea. The names are quiet, now tucked into the corners of your mind, where they can no longer hurt, only echo. You hum their shapes under your breath, a threadbare melody stitched from loss and recognition. You do not need to speak them aloud. They know. And they wait not in sorrow, but in silence. Ahead the mist deepens, not in menace, but in invitation. You do not need to see what lies beyond it. You only need to remember that you were here, that you became, that you sang. The sails slack now, do not beg for wind. They rest, like you, and as the ship settles into its final quiet, you feel the water rise beneath it, not to lift, not to drown, but to cradle. And you now, keeper of song and silence, both close your eyes. The sea remembers, and so do you.